have Alan Knott-Craig, who's come in from South Africa, and the title of his talk is Free Wi-Fi for Africa. So just a tiny ambition that he has. Alan, I see him.
Yeah, the first.
She's coming through.
We missed a bunch, but everything else is fine. Yeah, but thank you so much.
Okay, over to you, Alan.
Hello. So thank you for the invitation to be here. My presentation is about free Wi-Fi for Africa. It's not very theoretical. Maybe the guys can just go to the next slide. There are just 3 slides I need to start with, just to give people some perspective about what internet infrastructure is like. That's a fiber MAC for sub-Saharan mostly. And as you can see, there's fiber virtually everywhere at the moment. And there's a lot of fiber connecting the continent to the rest of the world. So when people talk about internet access in Africa, and they say, you know, maybe the problem is fiber, there's no fiber problems. If you could go to the next slide. One back. I think you skipped a slide there. 69, smartphones are also not a problem. For those of you who don't live in South Africa, 2 out of 3 families have access to a smart device, but only 1 out of 3 people are actually switching on 3G on their phone. The reason for that is it's a bit like when I come to London now, I switch off 3G on my phone and I run around looking for free Wi-Fi. The roaming costs are too expensive, 3G costs are too expensive. If you go to the next slide. If you watch an 8-minute YouTube video in South Africa, it'll cost you about $7. The average family in South Africa earns $210 a month. That means you can watch about 30 movies in 1 month on YouTube for 10 minutes, and then your money's gone. So if you look at the internet environment of Africa and South Africa, if you go to the next slide, the problem is not fiber, because there's lots of fiber. The problem is not smartphones. The problem is there's no affordable wireless. So let's just put that in context. Behavioral patterns for people using the internet in South Africa is mostly to do with mobile phones. So you're on your phone, you're connecting to the internet. Most people are not using computers at home or Wi-Fi at home, they're using their mobile phones. Most people are using 3G and they're using prepaid data. Now historically when you use prepaid data, you can measure the amount of airtime you're using because you can count the seconds. You count the seconds, you know how much airtime's been taken, you can budget. When you're on data, if you open a website like Wikipedia or YouTube, etc., it's being charged in megabits, and you can't be sure how many megabits are being used. So if you're sitting with, call it $10 of airtime in your wallet, as soon as you go on the internet, your airtime starts getting sucked out, and before you know it's all gone, so people can't measure how much they have. So even though the internet is very expensive in South Africa, it's say $8 for a 7-minute video, if you took it 90% down, you would still have people staying off the internet simply because they can't figure out how much airtime is going off their account. And when you've done the math enough on the whole thing, you realize the solution is not more affordable internet, the solution is free internet. If you want to get people online in South Africa and in Africa, you need to make the internet completely free. Next slide. So before I go into how we've figured out how to make the internet free, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm actually a chartered accountant. I have a numbers background. In 2003, I came back to South Africa from New York, and I couldn't get a job, so I started my own business. And I've been in telecoms for about 15 years now, doing telecoms and tech. In 2010, I started a business called World of Avatar. We invested in lots of tech startups, one of which was the biggest social network in Africa at the time, a company called Mixit. And in 2012 or so, I finished all of that, and I realized the big problem for tech companies in South Africa and Africa is we don't have a big enough local audience. So it's quite difficult to build a business when you don't have enough people in your own country to kind of have a critical mass. Part of the reason China and America keeps producing the tech giants is because there's such a big local audience of people online. So until countries in Africa have lots of people online, we can't expect to build big tech companies. So I thought before we go and build I spend any more money trying to build tech companies, maybe we can tackle the problem of getting people online first, which got me to this realization that the problem is not fiber, the problem is not smartphones, the problem is the cost of connectivity. And the only way you can solve that problem is to get it down to free. So we started an NGO in 2013 called Project Isizwe. And Isizwe had 2 missions. One was to figure out a way to reduce the cost of internet networks to as low as possible. And then we try to figure out ways to fund that internet without charging consumers. So the first problem you have to tackle was technology. There's two big ways you can connect to the internet. One is through a fixed line, and one is wireless. Most people in Africa and probably in the world will not be using fixed lines to get on the internet, so you can only really look at wireless as an option. Again, in Africa, you have two choices when it comes to wireless: 3G, LTE, that technology, or Wi-Fi. The problem with 3G is it costs quite a lot of money to roll out those networks, and the skills are quite expensive as well. So we decided to go with Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi has got some massive advantages. One advantage is that almost every device now has Wi-Fi inside it. In fact, more devices nowadays are coming out with Wi-Fi only and leaving the 3G out. So we didn't have to worry about devices. As soon as you get into the game of trying to provide devices in a market like South Africa, a very poor economy, you have lots of theft and security, and it costs a lot of money. So device penetration works for Wi-Fi. The second thing that works for Wi-Fi is the cost of the network. If you roll out a Wi-Fi base station, an actual access point, so say outside this building, you put a big Wi-Fi dish up and cover the whole square, that costs you, say, $2,500. Something equivalent for 3G would cost you about $25,000. So the actual cost of building a network when it comes to Wi-Fi is much cheaper than the other wireless technologies like LTE. And the last thing is, which is very important in our context, is the skills are pretty cheap to train and recruit and employ. So you can't necessarily build a big a 3G network in Africa without spending a hell of a lot of money on salaries because it's so technical and the skills are so scarce. Whereas Wi-Fi is pretty simple. Wi-Fi has actually been designed so that the average person can just install it in their house. You just have to be able to climb a ladder, plug in the electricity, climb off and not die. So we figured out Wi-Fi is the most affordable technology in the world if you wanted to lower the cost of internet access. The next problem we had to figure out was, okay, if you can reduce the cost of connectivity, how do you find people to pay for that connectivity on behalf of the user? Now, in South Africa, I'm not sure what the rules are here, but the Constitution of South Africa says that everybody should be entitled to certain basic goods, like water, electricity, and roads, and sanitation. So regardless of whether you have any money, you should have a daily quota for free of water and a daily quota for free of electricity. Those goods are funded by tax. So 20% of the country pays taxes and 100% of the country gets the benefits of these basic goods. So we felt we could go to the government and convince the government that the internet should be they should start treating the internet the way they treat water and electricity. It's a basic good and there should be a subsidy. And in 2013, I met the mayor of Tshwane. Tshwane is the capital of South Africa, used to be called Pretoria. I met the mayor, a guy called Koshienso Ramagopa, and he kind of agreed with us that this was not a bad idea. And when we explained to him how the numbers would work, it was a lot cheaper than the equivalent of British Telecom was quoting for him. So we started this little project, and in November 2013, we rolled out 5 sites of public free Wi-Fi. It's very simple. There's no username, there's no login. It doesn't require, there's absolutely no complexity to getting online. It's completely anonymous, which is quite important for first-time users. It's very fast, and you get it's about 15 megs per second, and you get a daily quota of 500 megs. And there's only one censorship, and that's adult content. So you can't, because we don't know how old you are, the only thing we block are these global blacklists of adult content. I mean, almost every day today we get an email from somebody with a scanned copy of their ID and an affidavit promising that they're over 18. Can we unblock something? So that's the only censorship. And what happened for the politicians is as soon as they started rolling out the public Wi-Fi, they started getting the votes of the youngsters. So today, Tshwane has 1,076 sites. About 130,000 people log in every day. It's regarded as the biggest municipal public Wi-Fi network in Africa now. And we thought, hey, we've cracked the code. We reduced the cost of the internet, and we've managed to convince the government to start funding it. But in 4 years of me meeting many mayors and many governors and premiers and ministers, I haven't met the president yet, we haven't managed to succeed in convincing anybody else to copy Tshwane Wi-Fi. Luckily, I haven't met Jacob Zuma yet. We haven't managed to convince anybody to copy the Tshwane Wi-Fi model. Now, the reasons for that, well, the first reason is a lot of the political leaders are too old to think the internet is important. I've basically come up with a rule of thumb. If a person's over the age of 60, they don't think the internet's important. And a lot of our leaders are just too old. They don't fully appreciate it. But if they do appreciate it, sometimes they're corrupt. And we're dealing with the government, and we're dealing with African governments, which are like all governments in the world. There's always the potential for somebody asking for something funny. And the third big problem is even if you find people who buy into the concept of the internet being important and they're completely honest, you don't always have budget. So, this always comes back to money. Everything always comes back to who's going to pay the bills. Now, South Africa is quite fortunate. We've got quite a big tax base, and we can pay for these infrastructure projects. Not every country is like that. But even South Africa is now going into a recession, so there's not enough money to go around, and they're certainly not going to start new infrastructure projects. So we've had to start thinking, okay, how do you roll out these public Wi-Fi networks without relying on the government to fund them? So we've come up with a couple of other models. Now, the first thing we did is we rolled out Wi-Fi around one of the high schools in Khayelitsha, which is a township in the Cape Flats. And instead of being completely, just click and you're on the internet, when you click on it's called Wi-Fi. When you click on Wi-Fi, it takes you to a page and asks you for a Wi-Fi voucher number. In order to get a Wi-Fi voucher, you need to bring litter to the school. So for every kilogram of litter you bring to the school, you get a 100 meg Wi-Fi voucher. Every day, kids bring hundreds of kilograms of litter. At the end of the week, the litter truck comes and picks up the litter, and we get paid for the recycling of the litter. And we take the funds out of that to fund the local Wi-Fi. The second project we've tried is micro-learning. We're trying to do learning for Wi-Fi. So when you go on the Wi-Fi, you click on this landing page. It says learn. You click learn. It gives you a little 5-minute or 2-minute little video. We've tried 3 different things, one of which is how to be an Uber driver. So this is a basic video on how to be an Uber driver. Then we give you a little test. It takes about 1 minute to do this little test to see whether you absorb the information. If you pass the test, you get given Wi-Fi. Depending on how much we can sell that outcome for, that depends on how many megs you get. So then we go to companies like Uber, and we say, how would you like to fund people becoming Uber drivers, at least being competent Uber drivers? How much is that worth to you? And we take those monies and we fund the local Wi-Fi. The other big funding source for these types of projects is becoming mining companies. So there's a lot of mines in South Africa, and they have lots of local communities, which are not the richest communities in the world, but they have a legal requirement to spend between 1% and 2% of their revenue on local socio-economic development. So what we do then, we go to them and say, okay, if you give us, let's say the Kumba iron ore mine in the Northern Cape generates about $1 billion in revenue a year. So about $25 million gets set aside every year for these types of projects. If we succeed in convincing a company like Kumba to take that money and put it into local public Wi-Fi projects, you can actually provide walking distance Wi-Fi for every citizen, all 3 million citizens living in the Northern Cape. So those are our missions. I mean, in the end, I think the funding models for these types of projects have to become very much for profit. There's only really one sustainable thing in the world, and that's making a profit. If you can make your own profits and use those profits to drive the free Wi-Fi, then it becomes a much more self-sustaining thing. Isizwe's role right now is really about innovating funding models and trying to find things that stick and then spit them out so other people can try and copy them. So now when I started all of this, I was just trying to get more people online so that it would be easier for me to make money when I start tech businesses, have a big local market. But 4 years later, I'll do it now because it makes a big difference. I've realized the massive impact that once people get on the internet, how it can change their life. And I've realized that digital inequality is just as bad as any other inequality, just like economic inequality or educational inequality. The difference, though, is that this digital inequality thing can be dealt with. Sometimes feels the other things are intractable, but this is one thing we can actually tackle. It's already being tackled. It's not a pipe dream. It's not academic. The city of Tshwane is already providing free Wi-Fi within walking distance of 1 million citizens. If the city of Tshwane can do it, then the whole of Africa can do it. And that's why I know that one day all Africans will have free Wi-Fi. Thank you very much.
Wow. Amazing. Before I open it to you guys for questions, and of course this is called Dialogues and Debates, so it's about the discussion. It's about asking questions to Alan. I want to ask, I'm a journalist, and I'm kind of always interested to think about the applications for news and kind of open societies in that way. So are there any tie-ins?
So once we'd rolled out the Tshwane Wi-Fi network, we said, okay, you've got public Wi-Fi, what can we put on top of the Wi-Fi? We created something called Wi-Fi TV, very original name. We recruited youngsters in the townships, put them into teams and become local journalists. We set up a centralized editor suite, and every day the youngsters go and do local stories, about interviews with the local reverend, or interviews with the local politician, or interviews with the local taxi drivers. We put that stuff, we curate it, we publish it, and it's like a local online video news. And then we found foundations like Open Society Foundation and Omidyar Networks, and now actually the Western Cape government are starting to fund local online news as part of their mandates, but what they realize is that there's no way people can watch it unless they've got access. So now we don't necessarily always sell the concept of free Wi-Fi, we sell the concept of local online news, and you get the free Wi-Fi for free.
Love it. Who else has a question? Okay, red top at the back. Yeah.
Thank you. Public health, prevention, public education. Isn't this a way that government would use the free Wi-Fi and contribute towards it? Instead of learning to be an Uber driver, you could learn how to take better care of your health.
Well, what we're trying to do is exactly like that, put different lipstick on this, so it appeals to different types of budgets. The government has this massive kind of pot of money, and that gets sliced and diced. So what we're trying to do, for instance, on this news stuff, is we try to tap into the government's budget for communications. Instead of tapping into budget for infrastructure, we tap into communications budget. Healthcare is an obvious one as well. Economic development is another one as well. As soon as you find somebody who says, okay, internet access leads to economic development, let's take our budget that's for economic development and fund Wi-Fi. We haven't had any success with any of those things. We don't have the most responsive government. But I don't think the future is actually going to be always having government buy-in, because there are just too many risks with political change and corruption, etc. You have to, and it's a hard sell. The easiest sell in the world is free. So if I can offer you free Wi-Fi for free, it'll be easier to get it out there.
Other questions? On the front. Oh, sorry. Kevin on the front, I can see. Someone over here. Right, okay.
Thanks. My question is, could you expand on, you said digital literacy changes people's lives. Can you flesh that out for us so we can understand better what sort of changes you've seen in the community once people have Wi-Fi?
Well, there's 3 stories to that. I mean, there was this youngster, a guy called Martin, who unemployed, he was 20. When we rolled out the Tshwane Wi-Fi project, he said stuff that he's going to create a local online radio station. So he created his own radio station, ended up with about 5,000 followers in Tshwane, in Pretoria, who were following him, using the public Wi-Fi that he was using to broadcast. He actually built himself a little business, generates about $400 a month. And he's been in Parliament now, he's presented in Parliament. So that was an example of someone who was unemployed, really had no opportunity, and just access to the internet changed his game, and also brought him into touch with a lot of other people in his community. The second thing which I realized over time was, when was the last time any of you printed your CV and handed it in? I mean, most people haven't done that in a long time. I haven't done that in 15 years. But most people in South Africa are still doing that. So the way the job market works in South Africa is if you're looking for a job, you go to a local community center. The community centers have job boards on the wall. You stand in a long queue. When you get to the front of the queue, you write down the jobs you want to apply for. Sometimes people grab the job off the board and eat it and run away, so that nobody can apply for it. Then they get into a taxi, and then they go to a print shop, they print their CV, and they get in a taxi, and they go hand it in the municipality or the bank. And they go home, and they wait for somebody to phone them. And there's too much friction in that whole process, both for job matching and submitting your CV. So that was a massive change. But I think the biggest change is going to be the fact that there's more political information washing around. In a country like South Africa, the vast majority of people are reliant on the state broadcaster, the equivalent of the BBC, and the BBC in South Africa isn't telling everybody what's going on. And the more people that get access to the internet, the more they find out what's actually going on politically, and the more political accountability we'll have, the better politics we'll have. I think that's actually, for me, the thing that gives me hope about our country, and I have hope for America as well, that over time the internet washes enough information around that better political decisions get made.
And any negatives? Any negatives?
There are lots of negatives. The internet enables lots of bad people as well as good people. But I don't think about that stuff. I think there's more to be gained by empowering people than the negatives. And I think the way you overcome these things like fake news and maybe sexual harassment and those types of things that the internet enables is to give more internet. I think the more you shine a light on everything, the more likely you are to end up with a good result. But this kind of instinct to hold back and slow things down, that you can't stop the internet. You can't. If you want to punish your kids nowadays, you take away the Wi-Fi, you make them watch TV. There's no stopping it. You've got to watch. You've got to roll it out faster.
That's great. Well, we're absolutely on time. Thank you for joining us for the first two dialogues and debates. We're back in half an hour with some more speakers, so go and grab a coffee. There's the barista at the back. Go and enjoy and walk around the other spaces, and hopefully see lots of you back in about half an hour. So let's thank Alan again.